Mikko is the founder of Sentient Media and is going to correct me if I got that wrong. There are a lot of umlauts in the name, and I hope it's correct. He's going to present on the principles of creating content for search engines and easy practical steps for researching, writing, publishing content, and this is whether it's posts or writing papers or entire websites. So lots to be picked up on here. I'm going to pass it over to you now. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Saroja. Thank you.
Hi.
Great to be here.
I'm going to be back in about 40 minutes, but I now hand the microphone over to you.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay. Great to be here. Thank you to the 50 by 40 team for this invitation, and thank you, Saroja, for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about digital visibility, online visibility, and specifically search engine visibility. And everything in this talk is going to be from the viewpoint of increasing the reach of your message. So this is calibrated towards advocacy organizations, but anyone who wants to convince or raise awareness of a certain topic that they care about. The introduction that you just heard was a very good one, but let me just highlight a couple of things from my past before we get into things. My career started at Google. I was a product marketing manager for 5 years over at Google, so I've always been very interested in search engines. And most recently, I was founder of Sentient Media. I'm still involved with the organization. And Sentient Media is a nonprofit focused on increasing the awareness of industrial agriculture, especially animal agriculture and its externalities, and the animal issues, and also intersectional issues related to those topics. And with Sentient Media, we increase awareness in different ways. We work with both editorial and algorithmic media, and I'll go into that distinction in a second. And we also work with numerous nonprofit and advocacy aligned organizations in helping them reach their audiences more. So we have a consulting practice on the side. I want to first scope out the topic that we're talking about, and even before getting into search itself, I mentioned algorithmic and editorial media briefly. The way we think about the media landscape, if we just start with a few principles, then look at a couple of examples, and then dive into the practical steps of how you can do this yourselves. Media is an intermediary between information and the public and individuals, right? Information media acts as the interface between the consumers, readers, audiences, and so forth, and the information. And in being the interface, being the intermediary, that's where the term of course comes from, media selects information, provides access to information, and interprets information. And in that media, I like to highlight two separate important parts. One being editorial media, which is something we usually think of as, when we think of traditional media, we think of editorial media. And then there's algorithmic media. And that is, of course, the newer crop of information gatekeepers and information access providers that we have. Editorial media is mostly human driven. So for example, in a traditional newspaper, a human editor picks the articles and picks the stories that are seen by the audiences. In algorithmic media, as the name suggests, it is algorithmically decided who sees what and also why. Search engines are obviously algorithmic media, but so is now social media. Social media is perhaps started as an idea of democratizing editorial media, but it is certainly driven by the algorithmic media principles. And we are not going to touch on social media in this talk. We're going to focus on search engines and search visibility. And even here, I want to scope that. Even that's a huge area. So I want to scope that and define a few things in there. So We have search advertising, we have optimization for search traffic, and we have visibility in search results. These are not apples and apples. These are different kinds of levels of extraction, if you will, or abstraction. And search advertising is often what we think of when we think about visibility in search engines, but that's not something that I'm going to focus on in this talk either. So search advertising would be something like Google AdWords, for example, and Google ad grants, which are the free budgets that are given to nonprofit organizations by Google in 50 countries around the world. So if you are interested in the search advertising side of things, the search engine is your friend. Look up Google ad grants for nonprofits, for example, if you are a representative of a nonprofit, and there's lots of good information about this online. Now, the two other topics, search optimization and visibility in results. The first one is what's usually meant by SEO, if you've heard that term. So SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it has been a hot topic in marketing for the last couple of decades already, and it comes with a lot of baggage. It may have maybe technical assumptions behind it. There's a little bit of snake oil being maybe marketed in that market, and there's also different kinds of ways of trying to essentially game the search engines. And if you take one thing away from this talk, it's that you should not try to game the engines, but instead you should try to give the people what they want. And we'll go down and follow that guiding light pretty soon. The other thing that I want to highlight is visibility in search results, and why I juxtapose these two or take them apart is that the first assumed idea of working with search engines is that you want more traffic on your site. And that's certainly something that we are interested in as well. But there's also a way of using search engines as essentially the end provider of the information. So using the search engines, using search as the provider of the message itself, because search results themselves can be visibility, and I'll go into examples about that. In either case, what is the most important factor in working with search engines is patience. So when we are providing information that we want to be indexed and ranked well, let's say on the first page of Google, we are working with a massive machinery, multiple algorithms that look at different signals, from the quality of the content to the speed of the website to how much it's being shared on social media to how much people spend time on the page and so forth. And it's competing with millions of other pieces of content for that moment in the sun on the first page, let alone towards the top of the results of Google. And this takes patience. You should think of this as an investment instead of an expense in financial terms. And you should also think of this as kind of portfolio building. So all of the advice that I give here should be thought to apply to a portfolio of articles, for example, a blog with multiple posts, a news site with multiple articles, and so forth. And by following these principles procedurally, instead of applying them to just like one or two things that you hope are going to do well in search, that's what will provide the rewards. And I just want to mention, I've used the word search, and then I've spoken about Google specifically. Anything that I speak about in this particular presentation is applicable to all search engines across the board. Google obviously being the big player in the field, but the same principles apply with the smaller providers, Microsoft Bing, DuckDuckGo, Ecosia, and so forth. And in thinking about what the search engines try to provide the users, I think it's useful to try and put on the hat of the of the search engine algorithm or the algorithm creator. What Google's algorithms, for instance, try to do is they try to reflect human behavior as accurately as possible. So they try and figure out how can we understand content in such a way that we understand what's the value it provides to the end users and who is it that it especially provides value for. And that's why the most important principles in writing content that will do well in search engines is to write for humans and not for algorithms. And I'm going to emphasize that in a couple of different ways and a couple of different places. But for example, if you hear about principles like you should have the keywords that you want to rank for, mentioned in the title or mentioned, 10 times in the first 3 paragraphs or things of that nature, like those are not hard and fast rules. If anything, they might be things that, they might be patterns that have been identified in the past that do well or correlate well with high placement in search engines. But that starts to get into the realm of trying to game the system, and search engines keep refreshing and changing their algorithms all the time. They personalize content, they experiment with different things. So even if you do a search on the same computer in the same country, just at a different time of the day, you may see different results or different order of results, for instance. So you should always think of that as a very moving target when it comes to the algorithmic side of the media. So there's a couple of key principles that humans like to see. So first of all, when somebody lands on a page, they want to be assured that it is high quality content. So that's why the first half a second are the most important, fractions of a second that somebody spends on a page. The time on page is a signal of value to a search engine. It's just one of the dozens or even hundreds of signals that a search engine looks. But if a search engine algorithm sees that most people who engage with a piece of content actually spend a lot of time with it, scroll it through and based on their behavior, it looks like they're reading and engaging with the content. The search engine figures that, okay, at least for this particular search, for this particular person, this was a good piece of content. So for other folks like this, let's make sure that they also see this, so they get the value out of our service. So in that way, the length of a piece of text is a value opportunity. It doesn't equate with value, but it's an opportunity to provide more value because you'll be able to write more about the topic or topics that you want to be known for, want to be seen in the search engines for. And another thing that humans like is getting fresh information. If you search for news about a certain topic, you'll probably want the fresher news instead of the articles that have been posted a couple of years ago about that same thing. So that's another consideration. And there's often in thinking about like, oh, how do I make sure that my stuff is seen in search engines? There are technical questions to do with the publishing platform, for example. Like if you've worked in this field, you may be familiar with things like meta descriptions or title tags or things of that nature. And I'm not going to go into the technical details of search visibility in any more detail than these 3 things over here. So if you're publishing using a tool that is essentially a hosted service like WordPress, Squarespace, something like that, you're covered when it comes to the technology of needing to be visible. Those are very well created publishing platforms, and since everybody almost wants to be seen in search results, most of these publishing tools take really good care of being optimized for search visibility. The one thing that you really want to pay attention to is site speed or page speed, especially as people access information more and more on mobile devices and small screens. The fast response time of a page is crucially important. So is device friendliness. So, it looks good on mobile. Google actually figures out, it crawls the web in a mobile first fashion, meaning that it prioritizes the mobile viewing, mobile experience of a page, not the desktop experience, like, the one I'm having now in front of the computer. And one thing you may want to pay attention to is the extensibility or future proofing of your site, meaning like if you use other tools to make sure that it works well with those tools. That's all I'm gonna cover there now. Now we're gonna go into the tools of actually following a process of creating good content for search engines. All of these cost $0, except for the one book that I recommend in case you're interested in a book. It's titled Think Like Google. The subtitle has has the word empathy in it, and I think that's the first for at least a search marketing book. But that's key. Empathy for the end user, for the reader, for the audience is absolutely crucial. The tools that I mentioned here are the first two are services that, if you are technical, you set up yourself: Google Webmaster Console and Google Analytics. Analytics tends to be better known, so also for that reason, I emphasize Google Webmaster Console, and also because a lot of times we want to use our own browsers to see like where different things are in different search results, but you should never trust your own browser. Even if you use incognito mode or something like that, there are so many different ways that Google will figure out how to personalize content for you that you can't actually trust what you see on your computer or your friend's computer. But you should look at the analytics, look at the tracking provided you by Webmaster Console. And the last three things there, so what Google provides anybody with in the search results themselves, are the main tools that we're going to focus on in this discussion. And I'll start with giving you an overview of the process. And apologies, this is a bit of a monster, but bear with me. And we'll revisit all of these and look at this at the very end one more time. So the process that I like to follow starts with a keyword wish list. So essentially a list of terms and searches and areas of interest that I want my content or the content of the site I'm working for to rank well in the results. Long-term strategy, let's think of it that way, like a long list of things that 5 years down the road you want to be known for example. And then what you do is you look at the semantic commonality of these things. So you group them by topic. So I'll keep using an article called Animals in Entertainment, done by Sentient Media, as an example. So if we use that particular article as an example, we want to rank well for the term animals in entertainment. That's one of the terms in our long keyword wish list. That's in turn belongs semantically together with things like circus animals, SeaWorld, elephants in tourism, those kinds of topics. It might also semantically correlate with more general topics like animal cruelty. And this work of doing these kinds of semantic connections is something that I recommend you do as an exercise. But there's also some of the tools can also feed into that and help you figure these things out. For each of the keywords, you generally want to have one article. So again, for the search animals in entertainment, we have created one article. It is over 3,000 words long. It ranks very well for that term, and it ranks quite well for other related terms in that particular semantic bucket. And that's also why it's important to think of these things topically. The articles themselves are based on an outline of content. The outline means simply a hierarchical structure you can think of this as first level header, second level header, third level subheaders under the second level header, and so forth. And that is, I think, a very powerful tool for figuring out how to write good content. And that's what we'll follow in this process. And the research and ideas will feed into the article you write. It will make it easier for you to figure out the outline of the article. It will make it easier for you to figure out what other things are related to the particular topic you're writing about right now. When I speak about an outline, I literally mean the way we like to work is by creating a spreadsheet for planning the article. Each one of the lines in the spreadsheet becomes a headline on one level. And then when we do the writing work, we essentially just fill in the outline. So instead of writing a 3,000 word article on one sitting, what you end up doing is filling out 100 to 200 words at a time under each of these subtopics, which also makes writing a lot easier. And there's a screenshot of the animals in entertainment article that I'll keep referring to, and you'll see it in a little more detail a little later. The tools of research that feed into your outline and feed into help you figure out the semantic topics are provided right there on the results page of Google itself. The first one is simply the results themselves. So if you want to rank for animals in entertainment, you search for that and you see who else is there. What kind of content is it? How long are those articles? You can look at an article and maybe copy paste the text into Word or use a browser plugin to figure out the word count of that article. But then there's three really cool features. And first of them is people also ask. And you may have seen this feature in results. And this is an example again with animals in entertainment. And among those results nested in there is this feature called people also ask. So this tells you what are the questions. So if somebody formulates a search about this topic as a question, what are the questions they ask? This alone is very powerful because this lets you figure out that, okay, if I see relevant questions here, I should definitely address those in the article or page I'm writing. But even cooler is that it's dynamically created. So you can nudge Google into telling you more about the topic by clicking on these questions. And when you click on a certain question, Google will load more questions into that list, and it will do it depending on what you just clicked on. So in this example, when I click on how can we stop animal entertainment as a question, the two new questions that Google populates here are why petting zoos are bad and how many animals die in zoos each year. If I would have clicked on something like how long have animals been used in entertainment, Google would have given me questions about the history of circuses, for example. I don't know, I'm making that up. So this lets you essentially go down this forking path of teasing Google into giving you questions that are more relevant to your topic than some of the other questions that you may see on the list. The second and third tools in that, in those features that are on Google's search page often are related searches, and there's two kinds of these. So the first one is searches related to this particular search that you searched for. In this case, I typed in circus animals, and Google tells me what are searches related to circus animals. Similarly to questions asked, I will use that to populate my outline and figure out like what are the other things I could be writing about, or maybe finding ideas for future articles. And that's why the loop back into the semantic bucket from this research that you saw in that monster of a workflow sheet that I showed you. And then there is the people also search for, which is very similar to the searches related. And that gives you an idea for, in this case, it interestingly lists animals in a certain order. And you should always assume that whatever order Google gives you is an order of importance. It's an order of priority, either in terms of engagement or in terms of just volume of searches. So those are essentially the 3 features on the search page itself that you can use to figure out what's the kind of content that you should be writing, what are the, the topics themselves, what are the subtopics, how do you create an outline that's then easy to write down and populate. And then I want to get into the third point of results being reach in themselves. So we have, with Sentient Media, we've written hundreds and hundreds of articles about animal agriculture, about plant-based foods, about the impact of industrial agriculture on the environment and so forth. And in some cases, we are able to provide the information that we want to get across in the results themselves. And we think of this as a very powerful tool for advocacy, because you don't need to get people to your site all the time. In fact, Google often tries to give you answers for simple questions and simple queries right on the page. So if you search for a currency conversion, for instance, on Google, it's going to give you the answer right away there under the search box. Similarly, in this example that I have here on the screen, we have the search for poultry farming. And in this particular case, Sentient Media's article about poultry farming is pulled into what we like to call the rich snippet or featured content in the results. So this helps us reframe the discussion about a topic. Traditionally, if you search something about animal farming, you get results about, the animal farming companies, the meat companies, maybe you get the farmer's perspective, you get the consumer's perspective, but you don't get the animal perspective. And this is what we, of course, want to change. If you look at the people also ask underneath this Sentient Media article that's titled "The Shocking Reality of Factory Farm Birds," the people also ask questions are, how can I start poultry farming? What are the 4 types of poultry? What do you mean by poultry farming? And what are the benefits of poultry farming? So obviously that's not a search where necessarily somebody is thinking about animal cruelty, but we are able to bring this perspective in a very informative, in a highly valuable way to also the audiences who might not be expecting to receive that kind of result. So that's what I mean by results being reach in themselves. And because of the power of search engines as information gatekeepers in our everyday lives, really, and globally, and at every level of society, I think this kind of a strategy of being present in these information gatekeepers, search results, and so forth, is crucial and can be very, very valuable. So I want to quickly summarize the main topics of what I discussed. Here is essentially a written out version of the outline method that we went through. You first wishlist what you want to rank for. You check for competitive feasibility, for instance. You then do the research and the outline. So you look at the related searches, questions, and competitors. You populate your outline, and then you start writing, and finally you publish. You should always write towards a goal in terms of the word count. As a rule of thumb, I recommend 2,000 words. Now that sounds long, I know, but it will give you much better chances of providing value to the end users. And when you do that in a way that is informative, and when you base it on an outline that you've done good research on, it is going to be valuable. Don't worry about it. And yeah, like I promised, here's that monster of a process again, from wish listing into semantic topical holes. Create an outline for an article, create that outline by researching, finding ideas, and populating the text itself, and also finding ideas for other topics that might be related, might be future articles, for example. And that's the main message of my talk now. I have some case studies reserved also for later, but since we're going into the Q&A now, I definitely want to have your voices heard.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, excellent. I feel like we had so much information all in one go, which of course means we also have lots of questions. I'm going to jump right in. What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen people make when they have great messages, great content, but they aren't reaching their intended audience?
But they aren't reaching their intended audience. I think there might be, not to start to philosophize about the question, but I think perhaps defining the audience is something that needs to be paid careful attention to. So especially in an advocacy setting, when you work with a certain cause, or even in an intersection of causes, you're often very inundated with the terminology, but also assumed prior knowledge and even assumed preferences of the people that you're writing for. So I think that's one thing, making sure that you are writing in a way that is approachable and accessible to anyone. The not worrying about being too simplistic or to writing for the lowest common denominator. Like those are not really worries that you need to pay too much attention to. Of course, depends. Like if you're writing for an academic audience, then very, very different. And
so
then
what you're talking about is before you actually have anything written down, you already want to sit down and really ask the question, who is this for? Which you're right, is a part of basic campaign planning and should then be a part of everything that you write online.
Yes, absolutely. And then I do want to point out the length. So it is a bit of a shock for people that the length of articles makes such a big difference. But it does, and it's also because this kind of like short throwaway content is so easy to create on the internet, right? That longer form pieces written with empathy for somebody who's looking for value, they're valuable. They're something that people want to read, they're something people want to share, people will get back to them. So that is, the length of an article is rather obvious, but it's also kind of your secret weapon.
Okay, so we have some thoughts there on thinking about the steps before you write anything, and once you do, creating something of value. That 2,000 words definitely does is a daunting task indeed, but it's a really helpful piece of information for understanding how to get some traction online and really find the people you want to speak to. I'm going to turn to our next question. This one is from Joanna. Do you have any suggestions for groups or individuals who want to engage but have limited technical resources? I feel this has potential to be a topic of privilege, where not all countries have the tools to use search engines in such depth. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. That's something we do talk about and think about at Sentient Media quite a bit. We want to make this expertise that we have available within our movement more broadly, and our executive director, Anna Bradley, is currently speccing out a program for doing that. So for getting these tools and getting these tools easily accessible and actionable is the word I was looking for, regardless of technical knowledge and technical resources. So yes, a very good observation and also a very good challenge.
Thank you. We're going to move to a question from BT. What's a good budget for building a site for a startup NGO? And should you use the free options? All those are all really, really tempting. What's your thought?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string? Sorry, a good budget is what you want to put into it. The free options are often, like for starters, they're perfectly fine. You don't need to invest in special design or special development. You can find like premium templates and themes for websites designed for your purpose, such as like a newspaper or a blog or something of that nature, easily costing from $0 to $50, for example. The free hosting options. I think one thing that you may want to take into consideration here is the brand recognition. So there is, like, undoubtedly, if you have your own domain name, it is more recognizable and more perceived to be more trustworthy than if it is essentially a subdomain of a free hosting service like Wix or WordPress. So at least investing in the domain name, and perhaps investing in if you have any special needs that you want to have on the site, such as survey functionality or something like that, making sure that is in there. And if you see that you have specific issues, such as the site speed that I mentioned a couple of times, then investing in those, like, specific things, finding a developer to speed up the servers or lighten the load, or point out that you're using extremely large images that take very long to load, for instance. Those are going to be worthwhile expenses.
That sounds like a health check that could be used. The conversation we've had has not entirely focused on new content and building new things. What you're talking about is also useful for people who may have these stranded pockets of exceptionally well thought out content that are simply not getting any traction because of, I've seen it quite often actually on YouTube. An amazing video has been put out and it has 17 views because for whatever reason it hasn't gained the traction that it needs to. And we see similar things with websites. So what you're talking about is a kind of a health check from speed to words that you're using that can be used also for existing content that people who are participating now may have on their websites and not getting the kind of traction they want.
Yeah, absolutely. That summarizes that really well. Thanks, Saroja. Yeah. I was mostly focusing on what happens, like, inside of the article itself. But yeah, then on the website itself, yes, I think your summary was spot on.
I want to turn to another question. It's so wonderful to see all these questions from people. Thank you so much for everything you're writing in. I'm hoping we'll get to all of it. This one comes from Arturo, who says, what would you suggest to small organizations who can only allocate a couple of hours a week to work on this? What would you say is the most important thing? That's creating a process.
Yeah, it is. I think it's creating a process, even if it's a lightweight process. But something like for myself, I know as an occasional writer, unless I'm super excited about a topic, it can be daunting to get into the act of writing, and that's why. So for me and a lot of people that we've worked with and used the outline method with, the outline helps. Not just technically, but also psychologically. It's much easier to get into that when you know that, okay, I can trust the process, and I can, even if I put in 2 hours a week into this, I know that I'll be generating these pieces that have a good chance of doing well and finding their audience. And I guess if you can, training people on that kind of a process, whether they're volunteers, for example, there's a lot of appetite for people. There's a lot of appetite for getting activist voices heard in many causes, and definitely in the animal and plant-based food causes.
I've just seen a question pop up that speaks exactly to what you're talking about. You just mentioned the word activist, and that often means that being engaged in conversation where people disagree online, that can heat up really, really quickly beyond what people have expected when they put out their first piece of content. Justin asks, how do you recommend handling haters that may be commenting on content?
Yeah. We don't have open comment sections on Sentient Media. We do engage with comments from all perspectives and all sides on Facebook and Twitter and so forth. But with compassion is the answer to that question, like to many questions, isn't it? That's how you deal with haters. I love it. There's I think this is where the peer group of other activists on social media can work very well. I've really scaled down my social media use, so the names don't come to mind. But I remember, like on Instagram, for instance, folks sharing examples of them engaging with people who, you know, just come from like a pure, you know, point of vitriol, and end up having, you know, a reasonable conversation that ends with them saying like, oh yeah, I guess, you know, I'm going to think about these things slightly differently. So it's not psychologically easy always to deal with that kind of comments that you get, but at the same time, you are striking a nerve. Like, you're making some kind of a difference. Like, if somebody is ticked off by what you're writing, that means they care on some level.
That's probably the most optimistic and positive way you can frame that. I like the idea of using compassion to engage and to try and de-escalate is really what you're talking about, is to say, okay, I've been thrown this flaming hot ball and I'm just going to like cool this conversation down and stay true to the messages that I believe in. I really like that answer a lot. We only have time for one last question. This one is from Adeyemi, who writes, when is your best not enough in putting out what you've written? So sometimes you feel like you really had it, but actually it was a flop. That's interesting. That's really about a sort of measure of the value of the content and where it can go.
Yeah, that's a little bit, that's why I mentioned that you should be thinking of creating content as a portfolio and as a process, instead of thinking about like, okay, this is the one article that I want to rank well, you know, in the history of the internet. But it is media is a hits driven business. Like, as a business, it is one where, you know, you create, like, let's just take the movie industry, right? You know, you put $20 million into a slate of movies, and some of them flop, and then, you know, one or two of them make back your entire investment, right? And I guess that's how you should be thinking about your content as well. Not everybody's going to love the same things you do, and that's fine. And even if this particular piece that you thought you put your best in doesn't do super well, think of it as I used that example of semantic buckets in that process. Think of it as adding weight to one of those semantic buckets. So think about it as adding that, you know, like semantic gravity, if you will, into what you're writing about, and behind your entire portfolio of articles around a certain topic, for instance. So it's not wasted work, even if that particular one doesn't do well. Don't lose hope. Keep at it.
I love all the optimistic messaging. I feel like there's an army of potential writers out there who feel thoroughly enabled, because everything doesn't have to be its best right away, and it's a process. Thank you so much for all of this information, and have an excellent rest of the conference.